again, thank you for putting in $1 million. We talk about this every year. What do you think $1 million will get you as far? First of all, how many miles of roadway do we have in Warwick?
I was waiting for that question, and I'm going to have Eric Girls, our engineer, come up because I know you'll probably have a few follow-ups on that same subject.
Thank you. Well, the typical pavement management program, just to step back a little bit, involves taking the roads that are already in good condition and maintaining them. Then, as you're doing that, you try and pull a couple of very bad roads up into that category. Once you start talking about complete reconstruction, the price gets considerably higher. Whereas maintenance, you know, it gets you the same product, but at a lower cost. So to answer your question, typically whatever our budget would end up being, we would probably look at allocating 15 to 20% of that toward that complete reconstruction. And for example, if it were $1 million, hypothetically, that would get us about a half a mile of poor road brought up to brand new condition. And then the maintenance categories that we typically use are a mill and overlay, where you mill off 1.5 inches and then you put it back. And then also slightly less expensive, you mill at the curb to maintain that reveal, and then you overlay the whole road, slightly less expensive. So with those two, using again the example of $1 million, you could probably get 5 miles of road.
Okay.
And then we have a component built in here for crack sealing, which is, from a pavement management perspective, the best bang for your buck. Essentially, it takes a road that is showing some minor deterioration and cracks, and by applying a very inexpensive crack seal, you add 3 to 5 years effective life. And so you take a road that's 15 years old, typically, start the crack sealing process, gets you another 3 to 5. Then you do it again, you get another 3 to 5. So a road that typically would only get you about 18 years of life, you've extended to 21 or 24, even 25.
And how many, so you're saying about 5 miles with $1 million, and how many miles of roadway do we have in Warwick?
We have approximately 400 that paved roadways that the city maintains.
So we're looking at about, I don't want to screw up my math here, but about 80 years to at $1 million a year, assuming the cost doesn't go up to get to all the roads.
Yeah, it gets tricky because as you don't get to a road, they are deteriorating. So it's not the best way to analyze it, but.
So how much would you need, as you said, to 18 years?
Well, it gets tricky because even with $1 million, like the director said, we have 400 roads that National Grid wants to get into. There are neighborhoods that require sewer that, you know, those roads are taken right off because we're not going to go in and pave a road and then just have National Grid or sewer or Kent County Water come in and tear them up. So as we start this process, I think $1 million is adequate because we have all those kind of flies in the ointment that we need to figure out. As we sit down with Grid, now that we know their 5-year plan, we can better program. And $1 million this year will be good. Maybe as we go down the road, we can, you know, potentially increase that. But for now, as we figure out our coordination with utilities and all that, I think this is adequate. Plus, as Dave mentioned, working with National Grid, if they put a main in and they're paving half the road as far as for the restoration, if we instead do that ourselves and then get reimbursed for that, that 5 mile number goes up to 10 because they've essentially paid for that other half. So, you know, that certainly makes the matrix work a little bit better.
I remember that was the Ted Sheehan plan. We used to follow the Warwick Sewer Authority wherever they were going to get as many miles as we could. I also recall that there are many roads around the city that the Sewer Authority has done. And we've seen over the last several years a lot of evidence of bucket compacting of streets and taking not the fill, not new fill, but the fill that was in there with the rocks and refilling holes where lines have gone into the street. And now we're seeing where the lines were put in, the road resurfacing collapsed. You know what I'm referring to? When you put in...
I understand.
Have you seen evidence? I guess better question, a better way to phrase it is, have you seen evidence of that around the city where a line's put in, they pave it, but they don't compact it correctly, and then you see that section of the street sag?
I mean, certainly you drive around, you see evidence of settlement in the road, but to specifically identify what's causing it, a lot of times it happens around structures. You have a manhole, and then around it there's a depression. Typically, that's because there's some kind of crack in the manhole that's allowing material in, and so that settles. You don't typically see it as you're just driving down the street. I mean,
I'm thinking of areas that were sewered, that were paved, and the area where the pipes went in were paved. They weren't compacted correctly, and now they're settling. And now we, as a city, are looking at the expense of repaving or redoing that street because it wasn't done right in the first place. And what I'd like to see as you monitor National Grid or as you monitor the Sewer Authority, that our engineers or our employees are going out there and making sure that they're complying with their contracts with whoever the utility is to make sure that those streets are compacted correctly, that clean fill is being put in and not the old fill being put in, and that it's paved over properly so we don't end up with situations where we have to repave streets because the fill wasn't put in correctly. With that being said, I'm estimating that to get down to a 20-year plan or an 18-year to repave our streets, we should be looking at budgets closer to $4 to $5 million a year if we want to keep on for life of a street as 18 years. Would you agree with me there?
Well, from the department that is looked at to help maintain streets, certainly that would be fantastic. We would love to be able to put together a program that is as encompassing as being able to, completely reconstruct roads, and, we'll add drainage to those projects, and, maybe we start doing some sidewalks as well. That would be fantastic.
And as you said, there are different levels of road resurfacing, and I look at the fact that for several years, the city was only budgeting $100,000 for repaving. And now, last year, we budgeted $450,000, and this year we're budgeting $1 million, and I think we're playing catch up. And I think that this line item needs to be funded at a level that maintains streets, the useful life of streets at 18 years, because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I don't think that we want to be in a situation where we're redoing streets completely when if we had addressed basic issues and basic needs ahead of time, we wouldn't be faced with those costs. So, I have concerns that we're only putting $1 million in. I'm glad we're not going out to bond on what I consider ordinary and necessary repairs with a useful life of 18 years. Some people would argue that the useful life is a little bit less than that. But I think this line item needs to be examined and it needs to be increased. My other question, David, has to do with street sweeping. Many years ago, I had a conversation with you regarding street sweeping, and you had told me that the areas that you do first in the city are ones with hills, and that's an obvious reason is because people can't stop going down hills if there's a lot of sand. Obviously, this winter we had to put down a lot of sand and salt. It's my understanding through conversations with our city council liaison and yourself that we're now going ward by ward for street sweeping, and the dangerous areas that where hills and potential sliding and potential accidents could occur are now being put off to the wayside, and they're going to be done last. Is that a recent change in philosophy, and why?
No, that's not correct, Councilman. What we do is, to be fair, I have 1,900 streets I have to sweep. I have 3 sweepers. Sweepers break down a lot. We get rained out a lot. To be fair to all the residents in the city, we try, and it's always been by ward, we try to start a different ward every year, or a different couple of wards every year. What we do is we go out and we do main drags first, and in the hilly areas, the sand doesn't necessarily stay on the road. It ends up at the bottom of the road, and we like to catch it before it fills the catch basins. That's the reason we get to the hills. I know it doesn't stay on the road. It usually doesn't on the hills. We try to get down there, and if you remember years ago, we were sweeping, in your ward, we were sweeping a lot of post road because the state just wasn't getting out there, and the basins were getting filled, causing problems for us. So nothing has really changed. We have a map in my office. Anyone can come in and take a look at it if they like. We go around and we try and start a different ward every year, because if not, let's face it, some wards will not see a sweeper till August, till it's almost time to start throwing sand out again. And it just wouldn't be fair to keep going to the same ward every year first. So we try and separate it, get it out there, and again, I had a councilman that actually has sweepers in his ward right now. People complaining to him that this is the latest they've ever seen a sweeper. It's only May. So I totally disagreed. But that's the way we've been doing it for years, and that's the way we'll probably continue to do it.
And if we had to use $800,000 to purchase equipment for your department, I would have liked to see street sweepers purchased, considering that we only have 3 and we have only a short amount of time, rather than new recycling trucks, because we had a second fire that destroyed the ones in the yard. Again, I think that that's an area, along with equipment. I know you had testimony this winter about snow removal equipment for sidewalks, and can you refresh my recollection about how many pieces of equipment we have for removal of snow on sidewalks and the age of that equipment?
Right now we have 2 only one runs. One is we've had around the city yard since, I don't know, the late 70s. The other one is I believe we bought it in 1995, if you recall that bad winter we had. Mayor Chafee was in at the time, and we bought that back in 1995. We still have that. We replaced the motor this year.
Yeah, and so as far as a priority goes, people walking in the snow, not on a sidewalk because something isn't plowed, and people riding bicycles in areas where there's hill and sand. And I would agree with you, in some cases the sand washes down the hill, and in other cases it doesn't. It collects in certain areas depending on the topography, and it creates a dangerous situation, and both plowing and sand removal, and we need the equipment to get that done in a reasonable amount of time, and we don't have it. Thank you.
Councilman Solomon, then Councilman Merolla Wilkinson.